The Omega guarded the Alpha King's pups while his Luna danced, and he chose her as true mate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Elena Moore stood at the far edge of Blackthorn Hall where the lights softened and the music thinned, a place meant for those who were needed but not noticed. She was an Omega, assigned without ceremony to a simple duty while the pack gathered for celebration. Beyond the tall doors, laughter swelled and polished shoes slid across marble as Luna Vanessa Hale turned beneath chandeliers, her smile practiced and radiant, the kind that drew eyes and applause. Elena did not envy the attention. She had learned early that being unseen was safer. The hall breathed with warmth from the hearths, yet the east wing held a cooler hush, a draft that carried the night's promise of frost. That was where Elena had been sent, to keep watch over the Alpha King's pups while the adults danced. She moved quietly, counting her steps, the sound of her shoes muted by thick rugs, her hands steady despite the weight of responsibility settling in her chest. Rowan and Ash slept in their small beds, cheeks flushed, breaths soft, and even, the rhythm of their dreams a gentle tide. Elena checked the windows, drew the curtains a few inches tighter, and adjusted the blankets so they would not slip. She remembered being told, with a polite smile that did not reach the eyes, that this task suited her, that Omegas were good with children, that it would keep her out of the way. She accepted the words without protest, because protest had never changed much. Outside, the temperature dipped toward the low 30s, and the old stone sighed as the building cooled. Elena fetched a shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, then draped another across the foot of the beds, careful not to wake the boys. She hummed a tune her mother once used on restless nights, low and steady, a sound meant to reassure rather than impress. From the corridor, music drifted in waves, violins rising, glasses chiming, the celebration carrying on without pause. Elena glanced once toward the glow and then back to the quiet room, choosing presence over spectacle. She pulled a chair closer, sat where she could see both beds, and set her palms flat on her knees, grounding herself. In this small, overlooked space, she felt the truth of who she was, not as a title or a rank, but as a promise kept. She would stay. She would listen. She would guard what mattered, even if no one was watching. Elena remained seated as the minutes stretched, listening to the quiet patterns of the room and the softer ones beneath it, the way Rowan's breathing paused before settling again, and how Ash shifted, a small hand curling against the blanket. She checked the mantel clock and noted the hour, thinking of how the night would deepen and the chill would sharpen along the windows. The east wing had always been colder, a quirk of the old stone, and she adjusted the curtains once more, sealing a narrow gap where moonlight slipped in like silver thread. She had learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, a habit formed by years of service and careful observation, and she moved with that same patience now. She warmed water at the small stove, testing it with the back of her wrist until it felt right, then placed a covered cup nearby in case a child woke thirsty. The celebration beyond the doors swelled again, a burst of laughter, the lift of music, and then receded like a tide that never reached this shore. Elena did not resent the sound. She understood its place. Yet here, her purpose felt clear and immediate, measured not in applause but in the steady peace of two sleeping boys. She brushed a curl from Rowan's forehead and whispered reassurance meant only for herself, reminding her heart to remain calm. The Alpha King's name carried weight throughout the hallways, but his presence was distant tonight, and she wondered if he knew how cool this wing became after sundown. She thought of the Luna's bright smile and the dancers' polished steps, and felt a familiar narrowing inside her chest, not envy, but a quiet acceptance of roles assigned without asking. When Ash stirred, Elena arose instantly, lowering herself to the bedside with a practiced gentleness, offering her finger for him to hold. He did not wake fully, only sighed, and she smiled despite herself. The moment passed, leaving behind a deeper stillness. Outside, the wind traced the eaves, and Elena counted the seconds between gusts the way her mother once taught her during storms. She remembered those lessons now, the insistence that safety often came from attention rather than strength. She checked the latch on the door, not because she feared intrusion, but because care demanded thoroughness. Returning to her chair, she pulled the shawl tighter and kept her eyes open, choosing vigilance over comfort. The clock advanced, each tick a small promise kept. Somewhere far down the corridor, a servant hurried by, heels tapping, carrying trays toward the glow. No one came this way. Elena was used to that. She kept watch anyway, knowing that guardianship did not require recognition to be real. In the quiet, she imagined the night passing without incident, imagined the boys waking rested, imagined returning them to their father's care at dawn with nothing to report but peace. The thought steadied her. She leaned forward, hands folded, listening again, staying exactly where she was meant to be. Time slipped forward until the clock marked the deep of night, when the hallways seemed to hold their breath, and even the music beyond the doors softened into a distant murmur. Elena felt the temperature dip another few degrees and rose to tend the stove again, careful to keep the flame low and steady. She placed a warm brick wrapped in cloth near the foot of the beds, a simple measure, one she had used countless times in drafty quarters, and watched as the boys settled further into sleep. The care came naturally, not from instinct alone, but from choice, renewed with every small decision. When a faint rattle touched the window, Elena paused, listening closely, then adjusted the latch and secured it, testing twice to be certain. She reminded herself that vigilance was not fear, it was respect for responsibility. The minutes that followed brought a change she sensed before she heard it, a subtle shift in the air that made her straighten in her chair. Rowan stirred, brow creasing, and let out a soft whimper. Elena crossed the room in 3 quiet steps and rested, her palm against his back, grounding and warm. She breathed slowly until his breathing matched hers, then remained there, counting heartbeats until the crease smoothed away. Ash followed with a sigh, rolling to his side, and she tucked the blanket gently beneath his chin. The wing remained still, yet Elena's attention sharpened, her senses attuned to every sound, every movement, as though the night itself were testing her resolve. She thought of leaving to fetch another servant, then dismissed the idea. She was here, capable, and the boys were calm. From the corridor came the faintest echo of footsteps that passed and faded, never turning this way. Elena felt the familiar ache of invisibility, then let it go. The ache had no power unless she fed it. She returned to her chair and positioned it closer to the beds, where her presence formed a quiet barrier. She recalled the lessons she had learned in places less kind than Blackthorn Hall, lessons that taught her that safety was built moment by moment, by staying when it would be easier to step away. The music beyond the doors swelled once more, a brighter passage, applause rippling like rain, and Elena imagined the Luna spinning beneath the lights, radiant and certain. The contrast sharpened the choice Elena had already made, though no one had asked it of her aloud. She would remain until dawn, until the Alpha King returned or the night released its hold. When Rowan's hand slipped free of the blanket, she caught it gently and held on, offering warmth without waking him. The contact steadied her as much as it soothed him. She adjusted her shawl and leaned forward, eyes never leaving the beds, listening to the house settle around them. Somewhere deep within the stone, a pipe sighed, and Elena smiled faintly at the ordinary sound. Ordinary things mattered. She set her jaw, not in defiance but in commitment, and kept watch, present and unwavering, as the night tested patience and found it ready. The stillness shifted just after the clock chimed the quarter hour, not with a sound that startled, but with an absence that made Elena lift her head. The warmth from the stove faltered, the flame thinning until it went out with a quiet sigh, and the room cooled by another notch. Elena rose immediately, checking the vent and then the stove, relighting it with careful hands while keeping her body angled toward the beds. The lights steadied, but the sense of change lingered, a tightening along her shoulders that told her the night was not finished asking questions. She scanned the room again, noting the curtains held and the latch remained set, then crossed to the door and pressed her palm flat against the wood, feeling the faint vibration of the house settling. Somewhere deeper in the wing, a door eased open and closed, not slammed, not hurried, just the sort of movement that could be nothing at all or something that deserved attention. Elena chose attention. She returned to the beds and drew them closer together, sliding the chair so it formed a quiet shield. Rowan shifted and murmured, eyes fluttering, and Elena leaned in to whisper reassurance, her voice low and steady, the cadence practiced and kind. Ash stirred too, his small fingers curling around the edge of the blanket, and she tucked it firmly, then placed the warm brick nearer to their feet. The draft pressed again at the window, sharper this time, and Elena checked the latch once more, then drew the curtains tighter, overlapping the fabric so the cold could not slip through. The celebration's music had faded to a distant hum, the kind that suggested the night was wearing thin, and Elena took comfort in that. She focused on what she could control, the small actions that added up to safety, the choice to stay present even when the house tested her resolve. When another soft sound brushed the corridor, Elena did not retreat or call out. She positioned herself between the door and the beds, posture calm, breath measured, making herself a steady point in a shifting room. Nothing followed. The quiet returned, deeper now, and Elena waded through it, counting her breaths, counting the boys' breaths, letting the rhythm anchor her. She thought of the Alpha King then, not as a title but as a father, and wondered if he knew how his sons slept when the night turned cold. The thought did not make her bitter, it made her careful. She checked the clock again and noted how little time remained until dawn would begin its slow work. A faint knock sounded far away, perhaps a servant passing news along another hall, and Elena remained still, choosing to be the constant the boys needed rather than the echo that traveled. She brushed Rowan's hair once more, then Ash's, each touch deliberate and light. The room warmed as the stove held, the draft eased, and the house settled into a quieter pattern. Elena did not relax her watch. She stayed, steady and alert, until the night, finding no weakness to press against, seemed to accept her presence and move on. The change arrived without announcement, carried on the quietest footfall Elena had ever heard, and she sensed it before she saw it, a presence settling into the doorway like a held breath. She did not turn at first, keeping her attention on Rowan and Ash, whose sleep had deepened as the room warmed and steadied. The stove held its flame, the curtains remained tight, and the night seemed to pause. When Elena finally glanced toward the door, she saw a tall silhouette framed by shadow, motionless and deliberate, as if the hall itself had decided to stand and watch. The Alpha King had returned earlier than the celebration expected. Caleb Blackthorne did not announce himself, did not call for attendance, did not step into the light. He stayed where the shadows softened his outline, eyes adjusting to the room, taking in the details he had not known to look for before. He saw the chair drawn close to the beds, the warm brick tucked with care, the cup of water set within reach, and the Omega seated between the door and his sons with a posture that spoke of quiet resolve. He watched as Elena leaned in to smooth Rowan's hair, her touch brief and respectful, and then adjusted Ash's blanket with the same careful precision. There was no performance in it, no glance toward the doorway, no expectation of reward. She did not know she was seen. Caleb noticed that first, the honesty of a care offered without witness. He listened to the rhythm of the room, the measured breathing, the soft tick of the clock, the way Elena counted the seconds between sounds as though each one mattered. From the distant hall came the last echoes of music, thinner now, applause tapering into farewell, and he thought of the dance floor and the lights and the polished smiles that drew a crowd. Here, there was only constancy. Elena shifted slightly, sensing the room rather than the man, and positioned herself more squarely between the beds. And the door, a subtle choice that did not interrupt her calm. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest at the simplicity of it. He had commanded rooms far louder than this, faced councils and ceremonies and expectations that bent the air, yet this quiet held him still. He noted the shawl drawn close around her shoulders and the way she did not sit back to rest, choosing readiness instead. When Ash murmured, Elena responded instantly, offering her hand until the boy settled, then remaining where she was, present and patient. Caleb did not step forward. He did not clear his throat. He stayed and learned. He learned how his sons slept when the night cooled, how the east wing breathed, how vigilance looked when it did not announce itself. He learned that guardianship could be gentle and unyielding at the same time. The clock advanced, marking moments he did not interrupt. At last, when the house had fully quieted and the last notes from the hall had faded, Caleb shifted his weight, a soft sound that reached Elena's awareness at last. She turned then, eyes widening only a fraction before settling, recognition dawning without fear. She rose smoothly, careful not to wake the boys, and inclined her head in respect, waiting for instruction. Caleb met her gaze in the half-light, and saw no plea there, only steadiness. He looked back to his sons, sleeping safely, and then to the Omega who had kept watch through the night. He understood, in that stillness, what had been guarded and by whom. Caleb remained at the threshold while the house settled into its late-night hush, the contrast between this wing and the distant hall sharpening his thoughts. He could still picture the chandeliers and the measured steps, the way conversation curved toward the brightest presence, the way Vanessa Hale moved with confidence practiced over years. The image did not anger him, it clarified. He had believed for a long time that leadership required spectacle, that stability came from appearances maintained and roles performed well. Standing here, he felt the thinness of that belief. Elena waited quietly, hands folded, eyes attentive without expectation, a presence that did not compete with the room but completed it. He watched the boys sleep, Rowan's chest rising evenly, Ash's hand curled beneath his chin, and felt the weight of what had been entrusted to him. Long before tonight, he thought of how often he had accepted assurances rather than seeking evidence, how easily he had allowed comfort to be mistaken for care. The house breathed around them, pipes settling, wind easing along the eaves, and Caleb listened with a focus he rarely allowed himself. From the far corridor came faint voices as the celebration thinned, servants moving with trays, the night closing its doors. Here, nothing called for attention. Everything required it. Elena shifted slightly to give him a clearer view of the beds, an instinctive courtesy that placed his children first. He noted the warm brick, the cup of water, the chair drawn close, the overlapping curtains that sealed out the cold. These were not gestures meant to be noticed. They were decisions made and kept. Caleb's gaze returned to Elena, and he saw the marks of a night spent choosing presence over rest, vigilance over ease. He understood then that the difference between dancing and guarding was not a matter of grace, but of priority. One shone when watched. The other stayed when unseen. The realization settled without drama, steady and certain. He took a step into the room, careful to place his foot where it would not creak, and Elena inclined her head again, waiting. He lifted a hand, not to command, but to acknowledge the work done. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough to respect the sleeping boys, a tone reserved for truths that did not need volume. He thanked her simply, without flourish, and meant it in a way that surprised him. Elena accepted the words with a nod, no smile asked for or offered, and that, too, taught him something. He moved closer to the beds and checked the blankets himself, feeling the warmth she had preserved, and the act grounded him further. The image of the dance floor faded, replaced by the memory of a chair positioned just so, a door tested twice, a watch kept through the coldest hour. Caleb straightened and looked once more at Elena, measuring not rank but reliability, not promise but proof. In that quiet, the path ahead shifted. It did not announce itself with ceremony. It aligned. The night had shown him what mattered, and he did not look away. Morning approached in small signs, a paling at the edge of the window, and a loosening in the air that told Elena the coldest hour had passed. Caleb moved with care, lifting Rowan first, and then Ash, settling them against his chest with a practiced gentleness that surprised even him. The boys stirred, then relaxed, trusting the arms that held them. Elena watched, ready to assist without stepping in, her attention attuned to each breath. Caleb crossed to the hearth and warmed his hands briefly, then nodded toward the chair, inviting Elena to sit while he settled the boys back into their beds. She complied, easing into the seat she had occupied all night, posture straight, eyes steady. He turned to her then, not as a sovereign delivering instruction, but as a father acknowledging a keeper of his children's peace. He asked her how the night had been, and she answered simply, listing what mattered and leaving out what did not. The draft at the window, the warmth maintained, the boys waking only once. There was no complaint in her voice, no appeal. Caleb listened as though each word carried weight, because it did. He asked another question, quieter, about whether she had felt safe, and Elena met his gaze without hesitation, saying she had been ready. The answer settled between them, firm and honest. From the corridor came the soft sound of doors opening, servants beginning the early routines, the house waking in layers. Caleb knew that when the hall filled again, expectations would arrive with it, polished and insistent. He chose not to wait. He spoke of what he had seen, of the chair placed just so, of the warmth preserved, of the vigilance kept when no one was watching. He did not praise extravagantly. He named facts. Elena accepted them with a nod, as she had accepted the night, without embellishment. Caleb felt the last of his hesitation fall away. He had spent years weighing counsel and custom, believing that balance came from maintaining appearances. In this quiet wing, balance had revealed itself differently. He told Elena that he would need her close as the day unfolded, not as a task, but as a trust. The words were measured, yet they carried a shift that neither of them could ignore. Elena inhaled, steadying herself, and agreed, because agreement came easily when purpose was clear. The boys stirred again, Rowan blinking up at his father, Ash reaching for the edge of the blanket, and Caleb smiled, a real smile, brief and unguarded. He adjusted the covers once more and turned back to Elena, meeting her eyes in the growing light. The house would soon be full of voices and judgments. Here, in this moment, the choice had already been made. Caleb straightened, offered his arm in a gesture that was both invitation and acknowledgment, and Elena rose to join him, her steps quiet, her presence sure, as dawn began its work. The great hall filled as morning claimed the windows, light spilling across stone and polished wood, revealing the careful order that followed a long night. Voices gathered in respectful clusters, the rustle of formal dress replacing the music that had carried the celebration. Caleb entered with measured steps, the boys settled with their attendants nearby, and Elena at his side, where she could be seen without being placed on display. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, and it rippled outward as eyes turned and quiet followed. Vanessa stood among the inner circle, composed and radiant, the last echo of the dance lingering in her posture, and she watched the approach with curiosity that edged into surprise. Caleb took his place at the center, waited for the murmurs to fade, and spoke with a calm that required no raised voice. He thanked the household for the night, acknowledged the service that kept the pack strong, and then paused, allowing attention to gather rather than commanding it. He spoke of his sons, of the responsibility that outlived ceremony, and of the standard by which he would measure trust. He did not look at Vanessa as he spoke, nor did he dismiss her. He simply turned and gestured for Elena to stand where all could see her clearly. The hall stilled further, curiosity sharpening into focus. Caleb named what he had witnessed, not with drama but with precision. The watch kept through the coldest hours, the care given without instruction, the readiness chosen when rest would have been easier. He spoke of presence as a vow, of guardianship as a daily decision, and of how leadership learned from such choices. Elena listened with her chin lifted and her hands steady, accepting the attention with the same composure she had brought to the night. When Caleb declared his decision, he did so without rebuke or spectacle, stating that the moon did not favor brightness alone, but constancy, and that is true. Bond would be formed by the one who stayed when the room was empty. The words settled into the hall like a held breath finally released. There was surprise, and then understanding, and then the quiet recalibration that followed truth spoken plainly. Vanessa's smile softened, her gaze thoughtful rather than wounded, and she inclined her head in acknowledgment, dignity intact. Caleb extended his hand to Elena, not as a summons, but as an invitation, and she took it, her grip light and certain. The boys stirred, sensing the shift, and Rowan reached toward Elena with a sleepy sound that drew a few softened expressions from the gathered pack. Caleb smiled at that, brief and genuine, and continued, naming Elena as his chosen partner in guardianship and life, not for what she promised, but for what she had already done. The hall responded not with cheers, but with a collective nod, the sound of assent moving like a tide. Elena met Caleb's gaze and felt the weight of the moment settle without pressing her down. She stood as she had stood all night, present and steady, as morning completed its work and the pack found its balance anew. The hall slowly returned to motion, voices finding their places again, But the space around Caleb and Elena remained calm, as if the night had taught the house a new rhythm it did not wish to lose. Attendants guided Rowan and Ash closer, and the boys gravitated to Elena without hesitation, one reaching for her hand, the other leaning at her side, a simple choice that spoke louder than any declaration. Caleb noticed and placed his palm briefly at Elena's back, not to steer but to stand with her, anchoring the moment in quiet certainty. As the pack dispersed to begin the day, he led Elena and the boys through a side corridor that caught the morning light, away from the formality and into a space where footsteps echoed softly and purpose felt unhurried. Elena walked with the same measured steps she had kept through the night, aware of eyes yet unburdened by them, her focus on the boys and the path ahead. Caleb spoke as they walked, outlining what would change and what would not, promising continuity before ceremony, stability before celebration. He spoke of the wing that would be prepared for them, of schedules that respected the boys' routines, of how guardianship would remain shared and practical. Elena listened and answered when asked, her responses thoughtful, grounded, never reaching beyond what she could give. The sun climbed higher, warming the stone, and the chill of the east wing faded into memory. When they reached a quiet garden court, Caleb paused, letting the boys explore the edge of a fountain under watchful eyes. He turned to Elena and acknowledged the night once more, not as a story to be told, but as a standard to be kept. He said that trust would be earned every day, including by him, and Elena met the promise with a nod, recognizing the weight and the respect in it. She spoke then, softly but clearly, of her intention to remain steady, to keep choosing presence, to hold fast to the small decisions that built safety. Caleb accepted her words without oath or flourish, understanding that vows lived in practice. The boys laughed, the sound bright and brief, and Elena felt the future take shape not as spectacle but as pattern, mornings built on nights like the one just passed. As they turned back toward the house, the pack moved around them with a new awareness, not of rank alone, but of value revealed. Elena thought of the chair drawn close, the curtains overlapped, the brick warmed and wrapped, and understood that those choices had guarded more than a room. They had guarded a path. Caleb glanced at her and smiled, a look that carried gratitude and resolve, and together they crossed the threshold into a day that would test them differently. Elena did not fear it. She had learned what staying could change, and she intended to keep staying, step by step, as the house and the pack found their way forward.